Tennessee did a lot of great things this weekend with a stupid amount of visitors. I mean, I'm not sure I would ever sanction it, but they seem to have pulled it off pretty well. You went into the weekend trailing for a couple of guys. It probably far fetched for a few, but they were going to shoot their shot, and then Tennessee, I thought either made up some ground and have become major contenders for guys like Damian Shanklin, Isaiah Gibson, or they've just kind of defined themselves as a major contender for Deshaun Bray. They continue to be in a really good spot with David Sanders. All the other fan bases and coaches at other schools can go ahead and continue to make a deal out of the misspelling of the name, whatever. The kid's not making a decision as big as this based off of some, low-level staffer hitting the wrong, button on the keyboard. Like the family, they're very intelligent people. Like they understand mistakes happen. They had a great time. David Sanders had a fantastic time. He is so close with George McIntyre and has really gotten close with other guys that were here this weekend. I said going in, this has got the recipe for either a bunch of people getting neglected or a melting pot. And it certainly felt like a melting pot based off of everybody I've talked to, whether it be recruits, coaches, national guys who've talked to similar recruits and coaches. It feels like Tennessee's done a fantastic job. David Sanders, told me kind of leaving the complex, the plan has always kind of been like first week of school in August. For him, he wanted to take the month of July. I said, are you still at that? And he said, as of right now, but let's get through next weekend and that could change. Like, in other words, like, let me get through this visit, see where we're at. It could get bumped up. So we'll see. Either way, David Sanders.
By the way, he goes to Ohio State this coming weekend. That's his final visit.
Yeah, he's got an Alabama visit middle of the week. Then he goes to – I don't think they're a factor. And then he goes to Ohio State. Steve continues to say Tennessee, Georgia, Ohio State. I think that's accurate. I still think Tennessee's positioned themselves the best out of any of those schools. I think he feels extremely comfortable at Tennessee. You could even say they're the Clemson of the SEC as far as culture, so to speak. So, this is a kid who I think how he feels, how his family feels, I think goes a long way. Grandparents had a fantastic time that were here. Really bonded with several of the other players. I thought Tennessee made the biggest move with a couple of Georgia kids. Let's start with Jaden Perlotti. Jaden's been kind of all over the map at times. He's been trending to Florida State to flip from Georgia. He's been trending to other schools to flip from Georgia and has not done it. Right now, you would say he's trending to Tennessee, to flip from Georgia. But he does go back to Georgia next weekend. We'll see if the Bulldogs can kind of flip that back around, what they elect to do there. Either way, it feels like Tennessee made up a ton of ground with him. And in fact, it, to me, has become the team to beat for Jaden Perlotti, leaving this past weekend. And then you have Isaiah Gibson, the USC commit who just visited Georgia last week. Tennessee did a really nice job this weekend with him, his family. Tennessee feels like they've got a ton of momentum there too. But again, you got to survive these other visits. You've got to survive the time. It sounds like he would like to make a decision end of June, first part of July. If that's the case, it's a lot easier to hold the momentum you got this weekend for that week and a half to 2 weeks versus, like a kid that's committing in late July or middle of August. I think, Tennessee, if he can stay on that path, I think has a real shot here with Isaiah Gibson.
Well, remember this. I'm going to jump in here just a little bit on Gibson because I have talked to him. This is a guy who 2 weeks ago was talking about taking 8 to 10 official visits. Now he's talking about maybe making a decision at the end of July, late June, July. So we'll see where that one goes because it certainly feels like his timing of things is vastly different than it was 2 weeks ago. But we'll have to see exactly how that yields out here following this last weekend with him because he was very much open to a lot of people a couple of weeks ago, but he really likes Rodney Garner and likes the development piece at Tennessee, AP.
He does, absolutely. And that's going to be a thing. I think, NIL will be a thing for him. I do think that Isaiah Gibson continues to, trend to picking, a school earlier than, he led on at the On3 Elite Series event. Because, again, best laid plans always change.
Sure.
So, Tennessee's done a really nice job there. We'll stay on the defensive line. Damian Shanklin, kid from Indianapolis. Tennessee had a really solid visit with him. He told me exiting, he goes, coming in, I thought Tennessee was, probably third or fourth. They're no longer third or fourth. I said, well, do they lead? He's like, I don't want to go there. He didn't want to tip his hand, but clearly, he left the weekend feeling Tennessee a good amount. And, got to spend some time on Friday night with Todd Kelly Jr., or sorry, not Todd Kelly Jr., Todd Kelly Sr. And Big TK, delivered a very passionate speech about kind of where he had come from in his life to get to Tennessee, what it meant to him, what it continues to mean to him, being a former first-round pick and playing in the NFL for so many years. And I think that really resonated with Damian Shanklin, a kid from just outside of Indianapolis. Flip it to tight end, and Tennessee already has Jack Van Doorslayer, who's a fantastic prospect. But because they moved Emmanuel Okoye to the defensive line, they would take a second tight end in this class if Deshaun Brame wanted to come. There's only one tight end Tennessee would take, and they'd love to pair Brame with Van Doorslayer. Brame was here, left Tennessee this weekend, got one more official visit. Oregon is that school. They've always been the perceived pick here. So Tennessee will have to survive that weekend, this coming weekend, because the momentum right now is with the Vols, but he still has this visit. And so we'll see what he says coming out of this visit. But he announces on June 29th. So again, for everybody that's on the general quarters or Vol fans are like, where are the commits? Where are the commits? They're going to come. The question is do they come to Tennessee? The dates are already selected for a lot of these kids, and they're going to hold true to these dates. So Charles House is the 22nd. You got the 29th with Deshaun Brame. You got potentially late June, early July with Isaiah Gibson, so on and so forth. So, Brame is a big athletic kid. And again, if you could pair Van Doorslayer and Brame, it'd be a heck of a haul for Alec Ablin in really year one as a full recruiter. A year ago, he kind of picked up mid-cycle. This one, he's had a full year to recruit these kids, and, would be really, really impressive to land both these kids if they're able to do it.
AP, everybody's going to ask, why no commits this weekend? I wasn't expecting any. I think that you have to understand, these guys are, if you've got one visit left, you're going to take the visit most likely, right? I don't think Tennessee's never been a big squeeze, hey, we can't promise you anything a week from today if you don't commit now. So these guys had visits scheduled. They were going to take those visits. So I wasn't expecting commits. But for a lot of people, it's like, hey, Auburn's getting a commit. Florida's getting a commit. Florida State's getting a commit. This school's getting a commit. Tennessee doesn't get anybody out of a visit weekend of 27. Is that a concern, or is that just the calendar and the way Tennessee is recruiting and the way the month of June goes?
I think it's understandable for fans to feel that way. Because you do look up and Eric Winter was supposed to be here this coming weekend and he just committed to Auburn. So, other schools do it a different path. They do put the squeeze on. And, that's just not really Josh Heupel's style. And so some kids appreciate that style. Some kids, I think are indifferent to it, but the ones that are indifferent probably they're easier to, get the momentum back for another school if Tennessee has some momentum leaving a weekend where, Tennessee doesn't push. But it's just not really his style. And, either going forward, he'll have to adapt that style or he'll continue to do what he's done the first, 4 years here. So I never expected anybody just to be like, oh, yeah, I'm in. Now, are there a couple that have told Tennessee that, expect good news? Sure there are. But, again, private commits don't mean anything. So you have to still get them to the finish line, and Tennessee will have to do that and survive some visits this coming weekend and hold some momentum into these dates that are coming up at the end of June and into July, or potentially even like a guy like David Sanders in August if he goes that long.
All right, let's talk a little bit about receivers. Rob, you can jump here too. I know you talked to a couple of the receivers as they were leaving town. The Miller kid from St. Louis is a guy you spoke with, and they had Cunningham in, and they had Jamie French in. Where do you think, AP, let's start with you. Where do you think this receiver thing is? And then, Rob, maybe what was your impression of a couple of those guys, those receivers that you spoke with that they were leaving town?
Well, for me, DJ Miller, someone Tennessee would love to have. I thought going into the weekend, Tennessee was trailing hard for Cunningham and French. Nothing about this weekend made me think, oh, Tennessee's the leader. I still think that they're behind a school or two for both. And I mean, French comes out and says, well, Tennessee's back in my top three. If you're Kelsey Pope, you're like, yippee! I mean, it's like you're leaving campus and you're like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that's what I'm saying.
And he's going to Texas next week, which has been the perceived leader for a long time. But then he drops the nugget in, Rob, that he's talking about coming back in July potentially to Tennessee for an unofficial at the end. I think Jamie French plays the recruiting game as well as anybody in the country does as a big time prospect. Fair or not fair?
Yeah, I mean, AP has a lot more experience with him than I do, but yeah, that's my impression that he's very and you see it with a lot of these kids these days compared to in the past, but he's very used to the interview process. He's very used to being quoted, and I wouldn't necessarily say careful, but he's aware of what he's saying and how it's going to be perceived. And again, a lot of these guys are much more polished at that kind of thing than they were 10, 12 years ago.
All right, AP, Caleb Cunningham says he's not a lock to stay in Mississippi. Most people think he's staying in Mississippi. Is there a real chance he leaves the state, or is it still an upset if he leaves the state? If he doesn't go in state, where would he potentially go?
I call it an upset. I don't think he said Florida, Auburn. I mean, Auburn doesn't have a quarterback. Hugh's still not found a quarterback. But I could see that one. Florida, I don't see. I mean, what kid in their right mind that's a high-end kid is going to Florida right now with the notion that, unless Florida just totally is the shock of all shocks this season. No offense to our good friend, Mr. SEC, Michael Bratton, but, I just do not see that one iota that Billy Napier's, going to be able to survive. And so I think that's something it's hard to see for a big time kid like Caleb Cunningham. I think he's staying in state. That's me. I think that's most everybody. I think he just fights that. It's like a kid that his dad, like LeVar Arrington, like he has to fight the notion that he's just going to follow his dad to Penn State. Guess what? He visits Penn State next weekend, so we'll see what happens. But I mean, most people are going to say, well, he's going to go to Penn State because his dad went to Penn State. Most people are going to say that Caleb Cunningham will stay in the state of Mississippi because that's kind of what he's let people believe down there, even though he's trying to walk that back and say otherwise. I think some of these kids probably talk a little too much, and then they pigeonhole themselves into a certain situation, and then it's like, oh, I got to reverse it. It's like Shady Hayward. Has he really found a new leader every week, or did he go, there's not really any suspense to my recruitment because I've said Tennessee's led for 2 months. Let's have some new leaders. And then Tennessee gets the last visit, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's back to Tennessee. Like, again, we'll see how all that transpires, but I think some of this is calculated by these kids, including Cunningham, saying, 100% not staying in state. Okay. He may not end up in state, but no one's believing that statement that he's 100% leaving the state. Mississippi State and Ole Miss are just, they've been written off.
Well, and you're exactly right. Here's the other thing too. When talking to the media, and I think this is something that's changing a little bit too. I think your stance now, and anybody jump in here, Eric, everybody, whoever, I think your stance now has to be even more guarded because of the NIL game you're playing.
Yep.
Right. If you're locking yourself down into a couple of schools early, how much leverage are you losing to yourself if you do those things versus play it around? Now, I think you can overplay it. All right. I think Shady's overplayed it because, he's been on 3 visits. He's got 3 new leaders after every visit, a new leader after every visit 3 times. But at the same time, too, I think if you're perceived to be going somewhere to kind of drive your leverage angle up, you got to make them nervous that you might go somewhere else. Right, Eric? That's business, right?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's all about leverage. If you say you're locked in, there's a leader for a couple of months, and even when you're taking these official visits, you're not kind of giving anything away, then you're kind of hurting yourself on potentially what your value is. But if you kind of let out there like, oh, this team is jumping up in there, it's not over and done. It's how much of this team, if it really does come down to one team or 2 teams, how much does this team really value you? And it's all about having that leverage. So I couldn't agree more. In today's era of college athletics, especially if you're a highly touted 4-star, some of these 5-star prospects. You need to be smart about that. And I couldn't agree even more about you can definitely overplay it. I mean, you're seeing this on the other side of some players, entering the portal and going here, then going here, then going here. It's like, dude, I mean, yeah, we get it, man. You're looking for the high dollar. So you can definitely overplay your hand as well. But I couldn't agree more. Leverage is key, especially for, these up-and-coming, college freshmen that are 17, 18 years old right now.
Well, and coaches at AP aren't ready to say no, right? In most cases, they're not very often ready to let guys just walk.
Yeah, correct. Now I'll say this: a guy like Shady Hayward, to me, if you're going to play if you're trying to play the NIL game and leverage,
and I don't know that he is. Okay,
yeah,
I'm
not
saying
that's all
what this is
speculation,
about.
right? But if you're playing the if you're speculating and you're playing the leverage game, you leverage with Georgia, Florida. If I'm any school, Tennessee or anybody else, I'm like, okay, go to Florida. And when they're fired in October, are you really going to, not be back on the open market at that point? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I think you have to use the right schools if you're going to leverage.
Yeah, I think that's and again,
and I'm not sure kids even see they see just ooh, Florida. They don't see ooh, that's on the hot seat,
No, I mean, and they're 17, 18 years old. They don't know what leverage is. I mean, they're trying to figure it out. They've never been in this kind of situation. It's really unique, kind of how some of this is changing. And we'll see how
at Florida too. Sorry to butt in, but at Florida too. I mean, everything's great. Everything's awesome. I mean, Billy Napier is the guy. Nobody's in trouble, right? I mean, it's not like they're hearing, "Hey, man, we need you to save this guy's job," right? I mean, they assume if they're going to Florida, he's going to be there to coach them all for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a story old as time, Rob. I mean, nobody's sitting there going, "I'm eliminating them because the guy's perceived to be on the hot seat." I mean, some people do, but there's always some people that go there that you go, "Why are they going there?" And they want to go there, and they don't think the coach is potentially in trouble. And we'll see if Billy Napier survives or doesn't survive. I mean, obviously he's got some early tests, and we'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah, I like AP's point. If I'm an opposing coach, I mean, I think it's kind of comical if a kid's trying to play you off against Florida, or if I'm an opposing collective trying to, especially if I'm an opposing collective, probably trying to play you off against Florida.
Well, and sometimes I'm not even that's we're talking about NIL in this instance, Rob. But I think even a guy like Nick Morton, Jeff County, you want to play D line, you go to West Virginia. You want to play O line, you go to Tennessee. But West Virginia's got one season over 6 wins in the last 5 years. It was last year when he was on the hot seat, and guess what? He'll go right back to that if they don't win enough games this year. So I mean, you have to be you have to think about where they've been and where they're going. Are they trending? Are they legitimately trending, or was last year just kind of a nice year? And then they go right back to 5 or 6 wins because that's where they've been, at West Virginia the last few years. So I think, for most kids, they think about just what's right in front of them instead of kind of the broad, where are they going, where they been, how does the trickle down affect me if this happens or that happens? I think most kids don't think about that at all.
No, I mean, and I think that's, I think it's not uncommon for that at that age. I mean, it's, they're just, that's that age. Okay, I decided to do this. I'm going to go do this right quick. Whereas hey, you probably should have thought about that earlier in the day. Or, I mean, they don't think anything forward ahead or think big picture there. All right, AP, a couple of last guys here to kind of hit on specifically. Juan Gaston's going to visit Oregon this week as his final visit. Most people think that's Georgia. Juan Gaston sort of played it off like it wasn't Georgia. What did you make?
Talk.
What do you make of that deal?
I think that anybody that thinks that they know what Juan Gaston's doing is mistaken because even if he ends up at Georgia, I don't think it's just some lay down that he goes there. I think that the kid probably would really like to go to Oregon because of all the flash and the uniforms and stuff. But if you know the kid, you know the mom, it's hard to see the kid going that far away to go play college football, which means it's Tennessee or Georgia, right? So again, for my liking, I just don't think anybody truly knows what Juan Gaston is doing. I do not pretend to know what Juan Gaston is doing. Juan is he's a bit of a mute. He doesn't talk.
Yeah,
So like, and I think that plays into the mysteriousness of it.
Yeah, I don't think I just don't think he's interested in sharing anything with anybody. I think he's pretty introverted, and that's just kind of
Correct.
just the way he goes about his business.